Hey y'all. So the name of my infectious disease is Borrelia Burgdorferi, also known as Lyme disease. So a side note to why I chose Lyme disease is, I don't know if y'all remember, but earlier in the year, Justin Bieber announced on social media that he had Lyme disease. Now, back in the day, I was a fan of Justin Bieber. I loved his music, and this really struck me like, wow, what's going on with him? So just going through the list and seeing this, I remember that. So that's what interests me into picking this. So what is Lyme disease? Lyme disease is a bacterial infection which is passed by an infected tick. It's also known as a vector-borne illness, meaning that the infection is transformed to humans by either a mosquito, tick, or flea. Infected with this disease, you develop a rash, fever, chills, but we will get into more details a little later in the slides. Moving on to the next slide, which is history. So, in 1970, Polly Murray and her family were experiencing arthritis. They had stiff necks, swollen joints, and were very fatigued. They also had a rash from a tick bite. When she went to the doctor, they told her that her son had juvenile arthritis. She wasn't satisfied with that diagnosis, so she did some research of her own and found out that 30 of her neighbors were experiencing the same thing. This caught attention of Alan Steer, who was a rheumatologist at Yale University. So while he was investigating with different researchers, a researcher named Willie Burgdorferi, he identified a microscopic spirochete, and he found the cause of the disease. The disease was then named after him, Borrelia Burgdorferi. After his discovery, it was later called Lyme disease because that's where the first outbreak happened in the town of Lyme, Connecticut. The next slide is casual agents. So, Borrelia burgdorferi is classified as a spirochete. Spirochetes exist in North America and Europe. Borrelias are gram-negative. They are motile with flagella on each end. The flagella allows them to move in a twisted corkscrew motion. Borrelia also has a linear chromosome, which is quite unusual in bacteria. Our next slide is going to be transmission. Now, before I get into explaining the picture, I wanted to clarify some things with transmission because it can be a little confusing. I know I was confused at first. So, the bacteria Borrelia infects certain small animals like birds, mice, lizards, etc. But ticks are infected by the bacteria and then it transfers Borrelia to humans and animals through bites. This is the only way that humans get infected. So humans are only infected through a tick bite. Now let's get into transmission. So you can see on the bottom left, the tick has infected the mouse with the bacteria. The tick goes on to move on to complete development, where it is in turn into a nymph. A nymph is just a word for the tick because it's growing and it's at a stage where it's at a more aggressive feeding, meaning it can eat on bigger things like this human right here that they have at number 3. When the nymphs, when they attach to the deers, that's when they're at their adult stage, and that's where they mate and hatch their eggs. And then you can see the cycle continues. The next stage is called signs and symptoms. So Lyme disease has 3 different stages. The first stage is called early localized, and the symptoms of that are fever, chills, headaches, and fatigue, muscle and joint aches. These symptoms usually start 1 to 2 weeks after the tick bite. In stage 2, it can occur early as several weeks to months after the bite. Some of the symptoms are severe headaches, stiff necks, facial palsy, heart palpitation, dizziness, short of breath, inflammation of the brain or spinal cord. Stage 3 can occur months or years after a tick bite. Stage 3 is more progressive. This is what happens if you don't get treated for your infection. You can have arthritis, brain disorder, mental fogginess, numbness in the arms and legs. The next slide is just some pictures of the progression of Lyme disease. You can see right here, the first picture, that's the bullseye rash. That's one of the first symptoms. Next, you can see the facial palsy, how his mouth is a little turned, and then the swollen knees. It gets pretty bad. So the next slide is epidemiology, and 70 to 80% of the infected by Lyme disease develop a rash at the site of the tick bite, which looks like a bullseye. Most cases are in Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Maryland. The cases are also growing in the Midwest currently. Citizens who live near the woods, hikers, backpackers are the people who are likely to camp are at higher risk. Areas with large populations of mice and deers are high risk also, because the ticks feed off of mice and deers. Lyme disease is not fatal, but if you are treated too late, the disease can progress and your symptoms can worsen. Some people develop cardiac and neurological symptoms, which can disable you. Next slide is diagnosis, how they diagnose Lyme disease. So it begins with the review of your health history. They will check for reports of tick bites in your area of where you live. They also will perform a physical exam and look for the rash, the bullseye rash that I showed you earlier, and other characteristics of Lyme disease. They don't do blood tests until a few weeks after the initial infection, when antibodies are more present. So some of the tests they may order is the ELISA test, which is used to detect those antibodies against Borrelia. Also the Western blot test. It checks for the antibodies of the specific proteins. And the PCR test, which is used to evaluate people with a persistent Lyme arthritis or nervous system. So how is it performed? On the joint fluid or the cerebral fluid. The medications that are used to treat Lyme disease are doxycycline, amoxicillin, cefuroxime, and IV antibiotics. The course is from 10 to 14 days. The IV antibiotics are used for the more progressive form of Lyme disease. Prevention of Lyme disease, some things you can do is if you are going out in the woods or outdoors, you can clothe yourself with long pants or sleeves. You can use insect repellents. You can also remove, on my advice, don't go outside. Don't go out in the woods. No, I'm just kidding. But the takeaway from this is Lyme disease is an underreported epidemic in the United States. So diagnosing it can be challenging because most of the symptoms mimic other diseases. There's no evidence that it's contagious, but it has been documented that pregnant women can transmit the disease to their fetus. More research and more research funding is needed for Lyme disease. If you expect you have Lyme disease, see a doctor, preferably someone who knows about the disease. And my next slide is references. I hope you enjoyed this report, and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.